When it comes to brand expansion, you got to believe it yourself.
For years, Richard Rawlings was the loudest engine in the room. The fast-talking, high-octane, grease-under-the-nails king of fast and loud and gas monkey garage. To millions, he wasn't just a builder or a TV personality. He was the spirit of American car culture, a man who lived life at full throttle and never lifted his foot off the gas. From roaring burnouts to million-dollar flips, from wild cross-country hunts to deals no one else would dare try, Richard turned old steel into gold and dreams into horsepower. But today, everything has changed. After years of adrenaline, success, controversy, and impossible expectations, a final decision has been made, one that fans never thought they'd hear. Richard Rawlings' time in the spotlight, the empire he built from sweat and ambition, the legacy that fueled a generation of gearheads, is shutting its engine down. And unlike every comeback he's pulled off before, this time there's no rebuild, no restart, no tune-up waiting in the wings. So what really happened? Why did the man who lived louder than life suddenly step into silence? What pressures, betrayals, and private battles pushed him to walk away? And what does goodbye forever really mean for the man who once swore he'd never stop chasing the next deal? Prepare to hear the truth behind the final chapter of Gas Monkey's era, a story of passion, burnout, money, loyalty, and a farewell no fan ever expected. Richard Rawlings isn't just leaving a show. He's closing the garage doors, for good. Long before the world knew him as the leather-jacketed, money-minded, turbo-tongued king of custom cars, Richard Rawlings was just a kid in Fort Worth, Texas, a kid who fell in love with horsepower before he could spell it. His childhood wasn't gilded with privilege or fame. It was forged in garages, in grease, in the roar of engines that echoed through Texas nights. His father, who didn't always have much to give, still found a way to take young Richard to car shows. For Richard, those shows weren't just outings, they were sermons. Chrome became scripture, horsepower became gospel, and the smell of gasoline was his holy incense. By the time other kids were saving for bikes or video games, Richard was hustling, working odd jobs, and buying his first cars, not to collect them, but to flip them. Even then, he understood something critical. Anyone can love cars, but not everyone can turn that love into a lifestyle. That hunger would come to define him. Before Gas Monkey, before TV, before billion-view clips across YouTube, TikTok, and television reruns, Richard lived a life that taught him how to fight. He became a firefighter. He sold newspapers. He even worked security, not because those jobs were glamorous, but because they funded the only dream that mattered: cars, deals, and someday building something real. Something that had his name on the door and gasoline running through its veins. In 2002, he made the leap that would change everything. Gas Monkey Garage was born. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't corporate. It wasn't built on investor money. It was raw, gritty, and loud, exactly like the man behind it. Richard didn't want to be part of car culture. He wanted to shape it. And in 2012, television came calling with the show that would rewrite his life, Fast and Loud. Suddenly, the world saw what his hometown already knew. This guy was different. He didn't just restore cars. He resurrected them. He didn't negotiate. He dominated the deal. He didn't chase fame. Fame chased him because his personality burned too hot to ignore. But success never comes quietly. Behind the roaring engines and million-dollar flips, the pressure rose like RPMs redlining with nowhere to go. The TV schedule was brutal. The deadlines were unrealistic. Every build was a race, every episode a new expectation. He wasn't just leading a garage. He was carrying an entire franchise on his shoulders. Fans saw the cars. They saw the laughs, the beers, the burnouts. What they didn't see were the nights Richard didn't sleep. The deals that nearly blew up, the staff drama, the industry jealousy, and the crushing responsibility of constantly performing, constantly being Richard Rawlings. Still, he pushed. He won. He conquered. And he became one of the few car personalities in history to break into mainstream pop culture. A mogul, a businessman, a brand. But like every engine that's pushed too hard, too fast, for too long, there comes a moment when something gives, little did fans know. While the world was celebrating Gas Monkey's rise, Richard was already feeling the first rattles under the hood, the signs that even a king built on steel and adrenaline could only run full throttle for so long before something snapped. The roar was about to quiet. And the man who lived fast was about to learn the hardest lesson horsepower could teach. When Fast and Loud exploded into a global phenomenon, viewers saw the glory, the roaring engines, the wild hunts for barn-find treasures, the shocking flips, the million-dollar deals. But behind those cameras, something quieter and far more dangerous was building, pressure that never turned off. Richard Rawlings had built his life on hustle, but television transformed hustle into a burden. Every episode, every season, every project came with a stopwatch ticking over his head. If one build ran late, if one deal fell apart, if one episode didn't electrify the audience, millions would notice. And in the world of reality TV, where drama is currency, the weight on Richard was relentless. While others celebrated his success, Richard carried the responsibility alone. Employees came and went. Fans demanded more. Networks wanted bigger, louder, faster. He wasn't just running a shop anymore. He was running a brand that could not be allowed to stall. There were arguments, broken friendships, deals that got messy, accusations from people who forgot that Richard was a human being, not a machine built to entertain. Every move he made was public, every misstep magnified. And when the pandemic hit, the world slowed down. But Richard's life didn't. He was forced to face a truth he'd ignored for years. The empire he built was running him. Not the other way around. The long filming days, the pressure to keep viewers guessing, the business negotiations. It all began to collide. Fans noticed exhaustion in his eyes, the slight cracks in the confident smile. Critics whispered. Employees shifted around him like gears grinding in a tired engine. And privately, Richard started asking questions no entrepreneur ever wants to face. What happens when the dream you built becomes the cage that traps you? People think fame is fuel. But for Richard, fame was slowly draining the tank. The spark was fading. The thrill became obligation. The passion began turning into exhaustion. He wasn't walking into the garage excited anymore. He was showing up because he had to, not because he wanted to. And when someone like Richard, a man born to chase freedom, engines, deals, and adrenaline, starts feeling trapped, something has to break. Whispers filled the industry. Was he done with TV? Was he selling the brand? Was Gas Monkey finished? Everyone talked, but no one truly understood what was happening behind those iron garage doors. Richard didn't fall. He didn't fail. He simply reached the moment every driven soul eventually meets, the moment when success costs more than passion can pay. And in that moment, he made a decision that would shock the automotive world, his fans, and even some of the people closest to him. It was time to walk away. Not because he couldn't continue, but because continuing meant losing himself. What came next wasn't a fall from fame. It was a man choosing finally, painfully, to stop running long enough to ask what mattered most. The same man who once vowed he'd never slow down was about to make the hardest call of his life, and there would be no going back. The day Richard Rawlings finally spoke the truth. The world didn't hear a man defeated. It heard a man who had reached his limit. The announcement didn't come with fireworks or drama or some explosive on-screen meltdown. Instead, it came quietly, the way real endings often do. One video, one message, one statement that rippled across car culture like a sudden brake slam on the highway. Gas Monkey Garage, the era everyone thought would never end, was shutting down. And Richard Rawlings was stepping away. Fans stared in disbelief. Comment sections exploded. People asked whether it was temporary, a stunt, a setup for a comeback. But Richard's voice carried a tone no one could mistake, a weight that comes only from final decisions and long nights spent staring at ceilings instead of sleeping. For the first time in decades, Richard Rawlings didn't sound like the king of chaos, the dealmaker, the unstoppable engine of American car television. He sounded like a man who had been running too long, too hard, without a pit stop. He explained it the only way he could. He was done living for cameras. Done grinding himself into exhaustion for deadlines and drama. Done sacrificing peace for pressure. behind the scenes, this wasn't a sudden choice. For months, maybe years, Richard wrestled with the truth. He saw old friends leave the industry. He saw names who once ruled the automotive world fade into quiet anonymity. And in all those changes, he saw himself if he didn't act now. Another legend who burned so hot and fast that by the end, nothing was left but ashes and memories. He refused to be swallowed by that fate. There were tears, not of regret, but of release. There were tough conversations with close friends, long-time employees, and family, people who had ridden shotgun through every high RPM moment of his empire. Some begged him to reconsider. Others understood instantly, because they had seen the toll long before the public did. Walking into the garage for the last time wasn't a grand finale. It was a quiet, honest moment. No crowd, no soundtrack. Just the echoes of a million memories bouncing off concrete floors and metal walls. Tools silent, lift still. Cars that once roared sitting in peaceful stillness. Richard stood there not as a TV icon, not as the president of Gas Monkey, but as a man who realized the greatest build he still had left. Was rebuilding himself. He didn't break. He didn't lose. He chose. And when he closed those doors, he didn't just step away from a show. He stepped toward a life he hadn't lived yet, a life without cameras. A life without deadlines, a life where he could breathe, think, rebuild, and discover who Richard Rawlings was without an audience watching every turn of the wrench. It was the end of Gas Monkey as the world knew it. But it was the beginning of a new chapter he never thought he'd write. For months, the internet was buzzing with speculation. Is Richard Rawlings done for good? Is Fast and Loud dead forever? Has he been silenced by legal trouble? Fans couldn't find a straight answer, only hints, rumors, and cryptic interviews. But behind the camera lights, behind the roar of engines and swagger of the Gas Monkey brand, Richard Rawlings was facing something more personal than any lawsuit or business stress, a test of identity. Because for a man who built an empire out of steel, sweat, and swagger, the hardest battle isn't losing a contract or closing a garage. It's losing purpose. Richard once said, when the engines stop, the silence can feel louder than the burnout. And for the first time in his life, silence had entered Richard's world. The fast life slowed. The wild parties disappeared. The travel, the million-dollar deals, the auction energy, all paused. He began spending more time alone than he ever had. No camera pressure, no production deadlines, no public spotlight. And in that quiet, something unexpected happened. Richard rediscovered himself. He remembered the kid who worked his way from printing T-shirts to flipping cars in a gravel lot. The broke dreamer who refused to quit even when life kicked him in the teeth. The hustler who built Gas Monkey Garage from nothing but passion and grit. But this wasn't a story of nostalgia. This was a story of evolution. Once the dust settled and the legal papers were signed, Richard made a choice. Instead of crawling back to the exact same life, he created a new chapter. One where he owned every bolt, every build, every business move. No network controlling him, no producers shaping his vision. He went digital. He went direct to fans. He launched new ventures, new automotive projects, new investments. And then, in the announcement fans had waited for, he confirmed that Fast and Loud, at least in its old form, was gone. Not cancelled, not destroyed, not forced into silence, but evolved. Richard Rawlings didn't lose everything. He shed what wasn't his anymore. Today, when you see him behind the wheel or in the garage, there's a fire in his eyes again. Not the pressure-driven intensity television demanded, but the spark of a man who fought his way back to freedom. He still faces legal complications. He still navigates business challenges. But the sentence the world thought was final? It wasn't a punishment. It was a turning point. Does that mean we'll never see a Fast and Loud revival? Never see the gang back together? Never hear the Gas Monkey roar return to TV screens? Richard hasn't closed that door. He's just not walking through it right now, because legends don't retire. Icons don't fade quietly. And Richard Rawlings? He was never built for silence. Fans call this his goodbye forever. But maybe they're reading it wrong. Maybe this isn't a goodbye. Maybe it's a reset. A comeback waiting for ignition. Because if there's one thing we know about Richard Rawlings, it's this. Whenever life tries to park him, He hits the gas. So whether this truly is the end of an era, or the engine rev before another wild ride, one thing is certain. Richard Rawlings didn't get sentenced to fade away. He chose to drive forward, and wherever that road leads, the world will be watching.